Have you ever wondered which techs you should hire next and how many tier twos versus tier threes versus project managers and all of those things that you should have in your business? Well, if you've had any of those questions, today's video is all for you. My name is Adam Henneman. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of a couple decades. I've built teams, I've morphed teams, I've helped coach folks through adjusting their teams as well. I've seen a lot of different things, and I want to talk a little bit about the different levels of engineer, different levels of technician within your business to make sure that you are hiring the right people when you want to hire them in all those pieces. In today's video, we're going to cover a number of different things. The first thing is defining the tiers and all that stuff, right? To understand what the tiers look like, because I want to set that groundwork before we get into deeper topics. Then we'll talk a little bit about when you should hire folks. We'll talk a little bit about how to hire, like questions to ask and those kinds of things. Then we'll talk a little bit about how to promote and kind of build that structure of an upgrade path for their career as they grow. So let's go ahead and define the tiers before we get too deep in it, because I think it's important to lay the groundwork. So in my world, we really have three tiers with a minor step up tier between tier one and tier two. So let's cover them first, and then we'll get into other pieces. So tier one for me is all about doing basic things, right? The rote tasks, the things you can proceduralize, things like password resets and user creation and other checklistable things, right? Group creation, user decommissions, those kinds of things. My thought here is you want to get your folks up to speed, trained on these processes, so that way it's just a good solid set of tasks for them to do. And once they master that, then they maybe step up to what I would call tier 1.5. And tier 1.5 is really all about adding a layer of troubleshooting on those kind of things, right? I don't want tier ones, brand new tier ones, doing a bunch of troubleshooting, right? That's going to be a bad experience for the user. It's going to make your tickets take an extra long time. And frankly, it could actually cause some further downstream issues. So my preference really is to get the tier ones really kind of like locked in on all those different pieces, and then layer on some troubleshooting options for them. Things like, you get 15 minutes to work at the thing, and if you don't have an idea about how to solve it, then you need to stop. I think that's a good way of kind of doing that. And so that's tier 1.5. Now, tier 2 is kind of where most of the escalations are resolved, right? So anything that tier 1 can't handle, they escalate to tier 2. Tier 2 basically handles, 85% of those things or something like that, maybe even 90, 95, depending on what's going on. And your tier 2s basically handle all kind of most of the rest of the stuff, right? That's your firewall management stuff, user issues, right? The normal user issues that got going on, things that require some troubleshooting, things that require some logging into servers and those kinds of pieces. And your tier 2s basically do the lion's share of the work. And frankly, you need a really solid tier 2 core to really do this effectively. And then you've got your step up to tier 3. And tier 3, and you could almost consider it almost like a project manager in this world as well, or project engineer more appropriately. And this tier 3 is really all about solving the big issues, right? Client's got a big issue, a big problem. You just send that person out and say, go fix this issue, whether it's virtual or in person, kind of doesn't matter. But the people you just put in front of the ugliest issues, right? The people that solve the issues that your tier 2s are having trouble with. It's kind of getting all of those things kind of dealt with, and really make sure that the buck kind of stops with them. And if they ever need to escalate beyond that, then they're actually bringing in a number of people to kind of get a brain trust going on in there. And I'll talk a little bit about escalation points on a different video. It's a little bit out of scope for today, but the idea here is tier 3 is really kind of where the buck stops from a technology troubleshooting perspective, because they can typically handle most of the things. So then you think a little bit about, when should you hire these folks, right? When do you hire tier 1s, when do you hire tier 2s, and those kinds of pieces? And really, it sort of depends on where you are within your MSP, right? Because if you are a brand new MSP, you're probably hiring whoever you can kind of find, people that you can afford, seem to have a good head on their shoulders, and those kinds of things. And really, the first probably 3 or 4 techs you hire are probably in that tier 2 range, right? Or right around there, maybe even a tier 3, depending on what's going on. The idea here is that in those early stages, you don't have a lot of time to supervise technicians, and so supervising a bunch of tier 1s as an owner of an MSP is pretty tough to do. So usually in that first 4 or 5 techs, you're just hiring people that you can just say, here's a big pile of work, go get it done, right? That's kind of what you're looking for. Now, when it comes to, you get 4 or 5 techs in there, that's kind of when the service manager should pop up, right? Service managers take a lot of that supervisory load off the owner, and that's a really important thing to do. But you need to get a few techs in before that really makes sense. And usually it's that third, fourth, fifth tech somewhere in there is kind of when you typically see a service manager pop in. So that's kind of what you're thinking there. And once that service manager pops in, you might start seeing some level one techs, showing up and becoming part of the hiring discussion, because the short version of all this is, again, as an owner, you don't want to be supervising a bunch of tier ones. You want to actually probably do as little supervising as you possibly can, just because you have enough other things to worry about. But when you have somebody in there that can do that for you, then that's really where this kind of takes off. And so usually in that between 5 and 10 techs, as we can start seeing some tier ones pop in, and that's allows the team to offload some of the stuff that they just don't want to deal with. Your mileage may vary. You might hire a tier one earlier depending on what you got going on. But this is what I typically see as I talk to MSPs as they grow up their businesses. And then as it relates to your project engineers and tier threes and those kinds of things, those usually kind of bubble up from your tier twos somewhere. You have a tech or two that's just kind of better at doing things, whether it's project stuff or whether it's just dealing with big ugly issues, or both, right? Those folks usually kind of bubble up through the process there. But ultimately, what you might find is that you end up needing to bring in somebody who's got some specific expertise, or someone that's just a level above your individual techs, and that kind of can happen anywhere. I probably wouldn't do that till you've got 4 or 5 techs in the mix. You shouldn't be having a ton of really complex problems or a ton of complex projects to work on. The more complex you get with things and the harder it is to support these things, the more expensive your resources are. In my world, I think you really want to make sure that you're not bringing a tier 3 on to handle a bunch of complex issues that you maybe shouldn't be dealing with when you're a smaller MSP. Now, when it comes to the question about how to hire your techs, or how do you ask them questions, how do you kind of handle those conversations, I think a couple things come to mind, and things that have worked for me in the past. The first thing is, I think you need to have some sort of a no a-hole test, right? For me, it was just to hop on a call and have a conversation with the person just to make sure that they were, frankly, not a jerk, right? I was looking to see if they could hold a conversation, see if they could kind of go back and forth and stuff, tell me a little bit about them, give me a little bit of history about what they have in their world, and those kinds of things. It was really more about getting to know the candidate more than it was, I'm going to ask you a bunch of technical questions. In fact, I rarely ask technical questions other than if they had called something out specific in their resume that said, hey, I know this thing a lot. I'm going to ask them a couple questions about that, just to sanity check the resume thing, right? Now, when it comes to in-person or kind of that more formal, video interview process, depending on your preference, we would ask a number of different things, and we would kind of approach things in a, sort of different depending on the role, right? For tier ones or for more junior technicians, we would probably ask them very minimal technical questions because it was unfair to ask them a bunch of tech stuff when they maybe didn't have the experience for it. But what we were looking for was, how do they handle situations? How, what challenges have they had in their working life so far? How have they handled some of those challenges? We would also look for passion for technology, right? We were always wanted to find somebody who loved and lived technology, even though they didn't have a job that necessarily paid them to do that, right? So we're looking for, are you the technical support for your friends and family? And tell me about some of the things you've had to deal with, right? And usually it was a pretty good conversation around I guess what my grandma did or whatever, right? And it was a conversation about that. Or, do you build your own computers, or what's in your computer at home? Are you a gamer? Like some of that kind of stuff really kind of helped us suss out the people who are passionate about technology, because really we didn't want to hire somebody who was like, I'm just looking for a job and I'm going to do fine when I'm here, but I'm just doing this to make money. While that's probably okay in some cases, we really didn't want them to be part of the team, because our team culture was more about, kind of handling the passion side of things more than anything else. We figured if they had a passion for technology, they were going to have a passion to learn technology, and we put them in with some folks that can help teach them things. They're going to be in a much better spot. So that was kind of the genesis around some of those tier 1 related questions. When we step up to tier 2, or someone who's maybe been in the space for a little while longer, maybe not quite to a tier 2 level yet, we would actually dig into what we had was 3 different scenarios. And the scenarios were really designed to get them the opportunity to think and we wanted to see how they worked through problems, worked through challenges, and how their brain worked for troubleshooting and those kinds of pieces. And so what we would do is we actually have them go through 3 different scenarios. And the idea here is that scenario 1 and scenario 3 were related, right? So the first scenario, what they learned in the first scenario, what we found in the first scenario, hopefully they would bring to the third one. I'll kind of step through that because I think it's an interesting way of looking at it for maybe for your own business. The first scenario was all about can't connect to the internet, right? The setup was I'd sit across the conference room table from the candidate, and the candidate would basically be the IT person, right? And we would kind of role play a phone call, right? And the call will go something like this: my internet doesn't work, and I need to get online right away because I have a thing due, right? Whatever try to give a little bit of a sense of urgency. Really, just give them a vague description of the issue, right? My internet doesn't work, which could mean a million different things. And we would look to see what questions they would ask and how they would approach the situation and what they would have the person do, right? Would they ask, are you at home or are you at the office, right? Are you wired or are you wireless? Is anybody else having the issue? We were looking to see if they asked those types of questions in response to the internet doesn't work, to see just kind of how they were going to approach the situation. And as we worked our way through that, they would oftentimes get to the answer, right? When it was something simple, like it was like a setting, a DNS setting or a proxy setting or something kind of goofy, things that we've seen that were a little bit out of the ordinary, but not like like an impossible situation, right? We didn't want to have a Kobayashi Maru situation, but it was really more around the idea that we wanted them to have an opportunity to solve the issue. And I realized I just made a Star Trek joke wearing a Star Wars shirt, but it is what it is. So anyway, we would ask them kind of this initial thing. They would step through it. They would either solve it or they wouldn't. It wasn't actually that important if they solved it or not. Certainly, if they get all 3 of them right, we probably were more likely to hire them. In fact, I think we hired everybody that nailed all 3 of them. But the reality was, we were looking to see how they processed. The second one was everyone's favorite: I can't print, right? Everybody loves a good printer issue, and so we would just say, I can't print. Now, the result was there's no paper in the printer. But if the tech would have said, hey, would you walk over to the printer and let me know what's going on? The thing on the screen would say there's no paper, right? And so then you'd add paper. But you'd be shocked at how many times people went right to like troubleshooting stuff on the server, removing and re-adding the drivers on the server, removing the print queue altogether, reinventing the wheel on this thing. We deliberately made it so that way we were looking to see if they were going to start at the kind of that layer 1 type of thing, or if they're going to start way up at layer 7, right? And oftentimes people would start at like layer 4 or 5, and they would go right to 7 versus go, hey, would you just walk over to the printer quick and just tell me what the printer's doing, right? And that was sort of a kind of an interesting way of looking at that. And it gave us a lot of good insight as to how complicated people would think, right? And then the third one was back to the first thing, right? It was back to my internet doesn't work. And we were looking for the idea that they may have learned something from the first one, especially if they struggled with the first one. We would give them some tips because we wouldn't like hide what the answer was. We'd walk them through kind of what we would do and those kinds of pieces to try to teach them a little bit about things as we go. Ultimately, we were hoping that they were going to learn something from the first time and bring it up in the third scenario, right? So if they forgot to do a IP config or something like that, or they were kind of flundering around when they got to a command prompt or something like that, we would look to see if they would then do the thing that we had given them some feedback on. And oftentimes, the ones that did that were the ones that probably got hired. The ones that either didn't take notes and or didn't apply what they learned in the first set were the folks that probably didn't belong on our team, right? So that's those are the 3 different scenarios, and we would spend a big chunk of time on that. We probably have an hour-long interview. This is probably 35-40 minutes, because again, we were trying to see how they thought and how quickly they could come up with solutions and troubleshooting, because we found that it was much harder to teach troubleshooting because it's much easier to teach actual technical stuff. If they had troubleshooting skills built into their skill set, teaching them the new technology or more advanced stuff was actually kind of easy, right? So that was what we were looking for. And then you think about our tier 3s or project managers or project engineers that we bring on board. In those one, we would for sure make them go through the scenarios. We kind of expected them to kind of nail it, right? So if we were interviewing a brand new project tech from the outside or a brand new tier 3 from the outside, we were expecting that they were going to be able to kind of figure those things out relatively easily, because they should be able to, because none of the questions were all that hard. Now, the second piece was, that we would like ask them some technical questions, right? So if they talked about having, high level networking experience, we would bring in, one of our techs that was really good at networking. If they talked a lot about Active Directory or group policy or Azure or something like that, we would bring in someone who knew those kinds of things. And sometimes it was us that were in the room, but if we didn't have that built-in knowledge, we'd bring somebody in to talk about it, right? So we would really kind of dive into some of the pieces, especially if they expressed that they had some sort of deeper level of understanding that technology, because we really wanted to suss out whether or not they were that deep in that or not. Because at this point, we're hiring, yes, for the ability to do the thing, right? Be able to do your job, but also for you to be able to, solve the big technology issues, especially with areas that you said you're already kind of an expert on. And so that was kind of our hiring process, and we would walk our way through these different pieces, and usually by then we would have a pretty good idea about whether or not they were a good hire for us or not. Every once in a while we would take someone out to lunch, especially in the pre-pandemic days. We absolutely did that. We would try to get, especially level 2s and level 3s, we'd take them out to lunch and get to know them outside the office a little bit too, because we thought it was a good idea to see how they interacted when it was kind of a little bit outside the comfort zone of being in a conference room. You've hired some technicians, you hired some engineers and folks that you want to give a career path to. And I think that's a really important thing that you do, because a good career path will keep people, in your company a little bit longer. In fact, I talked a little bit about it in my video about, new employee onboarding. I'll actually link that video up above, but that video talks a lot about how important building a career path is, because oftentimes you can overcome minor salary issues if they have a steady path for advancement and how to kind of level their career up, because maybe hopefully they're playing the long game a little bit. But this doesn't give you the agency necessarily to severely underpay your people either. So there's a mix of pay them appropriately and also give them a career path. And if you do both, I think you're going to keep people around your company much longer than if you were to be deficient in either one of those things. So what does it mean to have a career path for your techs, right? Well, one of the things that I think makes a lot of sense is to actually define what it means to be a tier 1 and a tier 1.5 and a tier 2 and a tier 3, right? You want to make those definitions as obvious as possible and as easily to follow as possible, which then gives you an opportunity in your one-on-ones and your reviews with your team to make sure that they understand that if you kind of work your way through these different gates, you're going to be in a much better spot to get promoted, right? Those are things that we're looking for. Those are things that they're looking for as well. Now, the key with this is that if they make it through those gates, it doesn't mean that they automatically get promoted, right? There may be one exclusion to that, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But the idea is that just because you did these things doesn't mean you're going to automatically get a big promotion and a bunch more money, right? That's not necessarily how that works. You do need a spot in your team for that. The idea is that you want to make sure you're stepping them through the process. Now, when I say that there's kind of the one automatic one, I actually like the idea of going from tier 1 to tier 1.5, and maybe you call it like a help desk associate or something like that, and they get to a help desk engineer, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but basically give them a little bit of a title bump and a little bit of a pay bump once they get their way through those demonstratable process things, right? If they knock out the demonstrated ability to do things like getting new users set up and passwords and user terminations and whatever that set of kind of common tasks are for your team, then once they get those things knocked out, then I think it's time for a little bit of a promotion to a tier 1.5 or whatever. Maybe you give them a couple grand bump and you give them some additional responsibilities for, now you can do some troubleshooting and those kinds of pieces. I think that's kind of worth doing kind of whenever that person's ready for it, but make sure they're ready for it and make sure you have some version of a test for that or a checklist for those pieces. Now, when it comes to go from tier 1.5 to tier 2, there's going to be some time in the seat required. There's going to be some mastery of some other pieces, right? You need to understand all of our different stack pieces and be able to kind of manage firewalls and do some of those other pieces. But you want to enumerate what the different gates are to work your way through those things, because I think it's an important thing to really have figured out is how is this person going to move from one to the other? How can you make it as consistent as possible? And when you go from tier 2 to tier 3, it's time in the seat, some certifications, right? Those and the certifications may be kind of half company benefiting certifications and half employee benefiting certifications. I think is important to have a bit of a mix there. You don't want to just necessarily have a ton of company only, and kind of screw your career. I think you want to have a mix of both. I think that makes a lot of sense. When you think about promoting and people passing certifications and all those things, I think it's important to make it a big deal. I also think it's important that when you promote somebody, that you write them a new job offer letter and you give them a new job description and all of those pieces, right? Like make it be an official thing, right? Don't just say, hey, congratulations, you're now a tier 1.5, or congratulations, you're on tier 2, pat them on the back, give them a new pay bump, and you call it good. I think it's important that you have a meeting about it. You make kind of a big deal about it. You give them a new offer letter, say, hey, this is your new role. This is what this looks like. All those pieces, and then set expectations, right? Especially if they have to get rid of stuff from their previous role. It's a little bit less likely for that to be the case in a straight help desk, level up perspective, but it's not unheard of, right? So you want to make sure that they're fully able to exit the previous role before starting this new one as well, right? Or have a way to kind of kind of hand that stuff off. Again, you want to make it a little bit of a big deal because you want the whole team to see, hey, when you do a good job here, you're going to be rewarded here, right? Those are important pieces as well. So that's really kind of how I would work to level up my team if I were to grow a new team tomorrow. Now, with all of this, right, MSPs don't hire all that many people, not especially not at a ton of frequency. As you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you probably hire some more people. But when you're hiring a tech or two a year, having this process dialed in right away is unlikely, right? And so what you can do is use like this video and other videos to kind of like level up the process on your own, define it, and then iterate on it every single time, right? If you make the next hire better than the previous hire, that's awesome. And if you can make the hire after that better than that very next hire, that's even better, right? So if you can iterate on this and make it better over time, I think it makes a ton of sense. So with all of that, if you want to see my video about onboarding a new MSP employee, click up here. And if you want to see my video about how the owner's role kind of morphs over time, go ahead and click up here. Thanks for coming on this ramble with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.